Hello, and welcome to session number 25 of FileMaker Group Therapy for Citizen Developers. My name's Tim Jones. In today's session, we'll be talking about container fields at a basic level. We'll start with an introduction to container fields, see how to insert files into container fields in FileMaker Pro on the desktop, in FileMaker Go on iPhone or iPad, under WebDirect in a browser, and using script steps like insert PDF, insert file, and insert from device. We'll also discuss the choice you have when inserting files into container fields manually, whether to embed a copy of the file in the database or store only a reference to the original file, noting that the reference option has been deprecated and is probably going away soon. We'll build calculated containers to show how a calculated expression can result in a file appearing in a container field. Lastly, we'll discuss remote storage of container data, learning how to enable remote storage for new or existing fields. I'll also show you where those files get stored on the FileMaker server, and will emphasize that you should not touch remote stored container files with other apps like Photoshop, InDesign, or Acrobat Pro once they've been stored in a FileMaker container field, even with remote storage enabled. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Wim de Kort, a giant in the FileMaker community, from whose writings I've learned so much on this and many other subjects. And now, on to container fields. Container is one of the 6 data types. A field that you define as a container field can store any type of file with no size restriction. Most files display their icon in the container field, though some file types display or play their content. These include images, which appear in full, video and audio that you can play right from inside the container, and PDFs, which, while they're often very cramped, at least attempt to display their first page and offer the ability to scroll to the other pages. Let's see how to insert files into containers, starting in FileMaker Pro on Mac or Windows desktop devices. We can use drag and drop or menu commands to insert files into container fields. I'll bring up our database that we've been building through these sessions, and I'll go over to the animal form layout for Hazel, our dog. Here I've got a folder full of images, JPEG particularly, and I've got a picture of dog Hazel.jpg. We can use drag and drop to drop a file into a container field. When you do so, it will embed the file into the database. It will not create a reference to it only. Next, we could use menu commands. Going over to the next record in the animal table, I'll right-click and say Insert Picture. Notice the file type choices that are available here and that Insert PDF is not available. That's because this particular container field is set to a static behavior, not an interactive behavior. And that is done in layout mode, and we'll talk about that later today. I'll say Insert Picture, navigate to the right folder, and let's bring in the picture of the bird named Faith. Notice that we have a choice here of storing only a reference to the file or embedding the file into the database itself. In this case, I'll embed like last time, but again, we'll talk about this topic later in the session as well. And the file is embedded into the table. It works pretty much the same on the Windows platform. Let me jump over onto Windows FileMaker, and let me jump over into our vendor layout. And here's a container field waiting to store the product catalog offered by this vendor. I'll right-click in the field and say Insert PDF. Now the Insert PDF command is available because I've got this field set in layout mode to behave as interactive rather than static behavior. So Insert PDF. There's the PDF that I want to insert. Once again, you have the option of storing only a reference to it or fully embedding it. I'll fully embed it this time like last time. And the PDF gets inserted. We see about the first half of the first page, but you'll see that I can scroll through it and see the other pages as well. Now, when you want to remove a PDF or remove a file from an interactive container, it can be a little bit tricky because clicking will not seem to allow you to select the field or get into the field. But if you tab into the field, I'll use the tab key, as you can see, moving from field to field. There we go. Then you can use the clear command to clear out the content. The delete key on the keyboard, on the other hand, usually doesn't work with an interactive container field. Now, let me insert that PDF again. I'll right-click, insert PDF, and open it up. And it gets embedded into the database. FileMaker Go on the iPhone or iPad takes advantage of those devices' unique capabilities to easily capture photos and video, barcodes, and signatures. Let's take a look. I've got my iPhone here. I'll wake it up and jump into the FileMaker Go application. I'll launch into the animal care database, provide a valid account name and password. I'll go in as Anne, because she has fairly robust access permissions. And we're in. Tap on More and into Animals. I'll tap on Hazel, our dog, and we see the picture that we had inserted before. Now, let me switch back into the Mac version of the database as well, that Mac session there, so we can kind of keep tabs on this as it goes. All right, so there's the picture. You can see it in both connections to this database. But let's say I've got a fresh new picture of Hazel that I want to insert. I've got it in my camera. Okay? So I'll tap on the picture, tap Replace, tap Photos, and it brings up your photo library. There's the picture of Hazel that I want to use. It drops it right into the database. I'll tap in an empty space to commit, and you can see that the other session, the other connection to the database, updates very quickly. You can even use the camera on your iPhone or iPad to capture a new image or video on the fly, dropping it right into the database. Let me find an animal for which we don't have a picture. Let's say Scout, and I'll tap on the container field. This time, instead of tapping on Photos, I'll tap Camera, and it launches the camera app. Now, I don't have a real animal to take a picture of, but I do have this little elephant figurine that will have to suffice. Notice that you can specify the resolution of the image. I'll go maybe medium resolution. And shoot. That looks pretty good. I'll tap Use Photo, and it goes right into the database. I'll tap in an empty space to commit. You could even capture video as well. You can also scan barcodes. Now here I've got a barcode printed oversized so that you can see it clearly here, but it doesn't need to be that big in order to be scanned successfully. And I'll jump over into our materials table. Here I've got a barcode field that expects the numbers or text of a barcode. And I'll tap on the lines with the up arrow here, and it will bring up, come on, there. It'll bring up the options of inserting current date, time, username, barcode. And then I'll bring the camera into view on that barcode, and it only takes a quick second for it to scan the barcode and insert the value. Now here's how you create a container field. Let me jump into the database again. Go into File, Manage Database, and let's say that we want to capture the signatures of our veterinarian doctors. So we're going to create a new field here called Signature. We'll make it a container field and hit Create. Click OK. And let me jump over into a layout where that signature field is needed. We'll put it on the Vet Form iPhone layout. There we go. I'll drag that signature field into place. right in there. And over here in position, we'll turn on the right anchor as well. Okay, now navigating into our vet form list on the phone, we'll look at our last vet, and there's that signature field, that container field. I'll tap into it and tell it that I want to add a signature. Tapping on signature here on the top right, and it prompts you for a signature. Now if I turn the phone sideways, like this, it gets even better. And I'll make up a signature for that veterinarian and tap accept. And the signature lands in the field. Couldn't get much easier to capture people's signatures right on the fly from your mobile device. Now you might be wondering if this works in WebDirect as well, and it does. Let me switch into a browser. There we go. And I'll navigate to my WebDirect page by typing /fmi/webd after our IP address or domain name. And there's our animal care database. Click once on it. It'll ask for login confirmation or login account credentials. This time I'll go in as Bob. There we go. And the WebDirect layout looks good. I'll jump into our animal list as well and maybe go into the Bubbles record. And you can drag and drop or insert files using menus into container fields. Let me get a window open, a Finder window open that's got our images again. There we go. And let's say I drop in this picture right here. And the picture loads. Lastly, let's look at the script steps available for inserting into container fields. In the database, I'll jump into the script workspace. And we'll create a new script that's a duplicate of the script template. And we'll call this insert into container. Okay. Now, into the script, let me add one of the insert script steps. There's insert audio video that allows you to insert an audio video file or a file reference into the current interactive container field. Likewise, insert PDF and insert picture both work very similarly. They allow you to insert a file or a reference to a file into the current container field. Right? PDF obviously stipulates it has to be an interactive container field. And I'll drop that one in and we can see its options. First, you can store only a reference or embed. Secondly, you can specify the source file if you'd like to in advance, if you know it in advance, specify the path to where that file lives. Okay? But the insert PDF script step and those other two, insert audio video and insert picture, are not nearly as flexible as this one here, the insert file script step. Insert file allows you to also import a file or file reference into the current container field or into a variable, and it also presents a dialog box that's configurable for the user. Now let's drop that one in and show you its options. So here you get to specify the dialog options, things like setting the title of the dialog box or adding file type filters, so you can specify what kinds of files should be insertable. Let's say I want to edit that filter to not allow all files, but maybe only image files. Only files whose file name extensions are one of these choices. And of course, you can even add your own, just following the same model, using the semicolon character as the delimiter. We can set the storage type to reference or to insert the file into the table to embed, or we can let the user decide at runtime. You can also choose to display the file icon or the content of the file when possible. And again, file contents can only be displayed with pictures, video, and PDFs, audio as well, but obviously we don't see it, we can hear it though. And you can also apply compression if possible or if applicable. I'll say OK there. And then unlike the other three, we can specify the target that we want this file to land in. We can choose the field, the container field that we want the file to be inserted into, or we can insert it into a variable, which is an interesting option. Okay. I'll go ahead and choose a field from the animal table, and particularly that photo field. There we go. And then lastly, like the others, you can specify the source file if you want to hard code what file is going to be inserted. Not where it's going to be inserted, but what file is going to be inserted. Otherwise, you'll let the user choose. All right, I'll save that script. And let's say we jump back into our animal form desktop layout. There. And we'll flip over to a record that doesn't have a picture yet. We'll run our script. And it jumps right into that field, asks us what file we'd like to insert, and gives us the option of storing only a reference or embedding it. Again, I'll go ahead and embed. And the file gets inserted as expected. So that's what the insert file script step allows you to do. Very flexible script step. Now that we have some files in container fields, let's see how we can optimize those containers for static or interactive content. Container layout objects are optimized either for static images or interactive content like PDFs, video, or audio. And we set this in layout mode, one container at a time. I'll go into layout mode here and click on the photo field, which is our container field in this animal table. It's on the data tab of the inspector. And as you scroll to the bottom, you'll see optimize for images or static content versus interactive content. If I had inserted a video of Hazel, I would have wanted to use interactive content. Or if most of the files being inserted into this photo field were going to be videos or audio clips, we would want to set it to interactive. Since, however, most of them, all of them in this case, are static images, I'll leave it optimized for images. Likewise, on the vendor form layout, we have that catalog field where you saw me insert the PDF of the product catalog, and that I've got it optimized for interactive content like PDF files or audio or video files. If I change it to a static image optimization and exit and save, then we just get the first page of that PDF. Now, if I set that back to interactive content, there, we're going to see an error message, and I think here's why. Because I'm running FileMaker Server 18, whereas we're using FileMaker Pro 19. And I think there's some discrepancy there in that lack of parity between the server version and the client version. You didn't see that on the Windows side. Windows version of FileMaker 19 was able to display that PDF just fine. But between Mac, FileMaker 19.4, which is the current version right now, and FileMaker Server 18, I think something's getting in the way there for that PDF to display. Just a side note, you get no interactivity with container fields that live in portals. However, you can interact if the container field is in a popover within a portal. When we insert a file into a container field, FileMaker lets us choose to either embed the file in the database or store only a reference to where it lives. You've seen that happen in the demos so far. Now, what's the difference? Well, when you embed files, the database grows larger, which means that backups will take longer, Storing only a reference to the file, on the other hand, does not cause the database to grow, as it only stores the few characters needed to express the path to where the file lives. With embedded files, all users, Mac and Windows, can see the files inserted into container fields, whereas referenced files may not be visible to all users and will break if you move, rename, or delete the file. Make sure the referenced files were stored in a location that is accessible to all your users, such as on a shared drive that can be mounted by each user at the time when the reference was created, that is, at the time the file was inserted into the container field. If the location is not accessible, like if the file inserted came from user Bob's C drive or his internal hard drive, then users will see a message in the container field, "The file cannot be found," because they don't have network permissions to see files on Bob's C drive. When you embed a file, you're giving FileMaker ownership of that file, and you then should not tamper with the file outside of FileMaker. If you need to edit it, then right-click the container field and choose Export Field Contents to save a copy of the file locally. Then edit that copy and reinsert it into the container field in place of the old file. Referenced files, on the other hand, are fair game. You can edit the original source file without issue, as FileMaker has no ownership of that file. It's merely pointing to its existence somewhere outside the database. Most importantly, the ability to store only a reference to a file when you insert it into a container field was added to the deprecated features list back in FileMaker version 16, which means it will disappear in some future version, but we don't know when. It's still available here in version 19.4. However, you should not build any new solutions that depend on this feature, and you may want to start reworking old ones that rely on it, or they will break when support for it finally disappears. If you want to keep your files outside of FileMaker so that you can edit or replace them easily, you may have another option: calculated containers. A calculated container is a calculation field with its result type set to container. If the formula you write results in a valid file path to a file, then the container field will display that file. This creates a reference only to the file. It does not embed the file into the database, so therefore it may break when support for referencing dies. However, the language used in the deprecation notice is not clear on this point. If you know for certain, please add it in the comments below. Now, because they're being referenced, the files inserted should be stored on a drive that all users have permission to access, not in someone's personal folder. You can do this with a web viewer instead, and it's the same idea. Since you're not pointing to a web page, you would use the file path protocol, not HTTP. Now, it's important to remember that the path to the same network volume differs for Mac and Windows users. Here's a demonstration of how to learn the path and then how to write a formula that will produce a valid file path for each platform. What I'm going to do is we'll go back to Animals, and I'm going to define some new fields in this animal table. First, we'll just define a field called Photo Global, set it to a container type, and create. And I'll set it storage to global storage. We're going to use this field as just kind of a temporary holding tank for photos that we want to learn the paths of. The next field I'll create will be Photo Path. And this is going to be a calc field whose result is going to be text. And the formula we'll write here will be get as text. This get as text function is a very interesting one. You can see it returns data as field type text or as data type text, but when you point it to a container field, then it's going to return the path and other information about that file, the path to and other information about the file that's inserted. And then I'll refer to that photo global field. There we go. Now the storage on this field is going to have to be unstored because it refers to a globally stored field. And you can't store the results of a calculation that references a global field. And then a third field that I'll create will be photo calc. Okay, and that's going to be a calculation field that will result in a container type of data, and I'm just going to point that to that photo path field like so. Okay, and again, the storage on this field will have to be unstored because it refers to an unstored field. It refers to the photo path field. If I try to unstore it, or if I try to store it, it'll tell me, no, you can't do that. Okay, so there are those three fields. Let's see them get dropped onto the layout here, like so. And I'll move them into this calculated container, or at least move the photo global field into this calculated container tab. Okay. Exit and save. Now on the Mac side, I'm going to insert a reference to an image of Hazel, this one here, that lives in this path. It's on a shared volume, a file server, webinars, FM group therapy, images, and like so. All right, and let's see the path that the calc returns. So I'll say insert picture. Make sure I turn on the store only a reference option. Again, there's that path, same path I just showed you. Okay, we'll insert a picture, a reference to the picture of Hazel. All right, and let's take a look at that that calc field and see what it got. First line it gives us is the pixel dimensions of the image. Then, kind of a designation of the file name itself with the file type out front of it. And then on this third line, and this will help if I will resize this field a little bit, maybe like so, and even make it stretchy, both tall and wide. There, okay. And so we've got this file path that's preceded with the right designation for an image that was inserted from a Mac, and then the path down to the file. You can see that the calculated container field, this one here, this calculated container field, is able to find that portion of it, of that path, and result in displaying the actual same container file, the same file in the container. Now remember though that the path to the same network file server location is going to be different when accessed from a Windows connection. So let me jump back over into Windows and we'll look at the exact same record. Okay, and now this is a global field, so it's session specific, so it's not being populated here because it's a global field, and this connection to the database has its own discrete values compared to other connections. I'll insert the same image from the same location on the server. There it is, and there's the Hazel image, storing only a reference to it. And let's see what the path gives us here. Click in this calc field that's returning the information about it. And you can see that the path is quite different than what we got on the Mac side. Right? It starts with image win, not image Mac. It's got the name of the server and then all the rest. Now, to make this easier, I've encapsulated this into a little text file so we can compare the two straight up against each other. So image Mac versus image win. On the Windows side, you get the double / and then the name of the file server. And from that point out, it's the same, trainers / webinars and so forth, right? Just folder after folder after folder, and eventually the name of the file. Now we can create a calculation that will point to the picture of each dog. We can use its genus name, dog underscore, its animal name, Hazel. As long as our files have consistent naming patterns like that, and they do, then we'll be able to successfully reference a file that lives in such and such a folder, a commonly available shared drive folder, and that would allow us to be able to replace those files, to edit those files very easily outside of FileMaker without any harm to the connection between FileMaker and that file, because by not embedding it, we haven't given FileMaker ownership of the file. We're simply pointing to it using a calculated container. All right, I'll move this over here a little bit so perhaps we can see it better. There we go. Now, let me go and redefine the photo calc field. That's this one over here, right? Photo calc is on the right. It's simply a calculated container field. And I want to write a formula into that field that will give us a valid file path to each animal. We're going to assume that we want to point to these files external to FileMaker rather than embed them in this particular instance. So I'll edit this photo calc field calculation. Get rid of what's there. And let's write this formula. We'll say let there exist, and I'll clean this up as usual. There. We'll say let there exist a variable. We'll call it platform. That's equal to, and I'm going to use the get system platform function here. Get, and then system platform. There. If that's a new one to you, here's how it works. Get system platform returns a 1 if the current user is connected under macOS. A -2 if they're connecting from a Windows machine. 3 if from iOS. 4 if they're on WebDirect. 5 if they're on CentOS Linux. And 8 if they're on Ubuntu Linux. Now, the weird one here in the mix is the -2 for Windows. Okay, so what we're going to do is we want to get positive numbers across the board: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8. And so we're just going to wrap that get system platform bit inside the absolute value function. ABS will return the absolute value, or in other words, the positive version of whatever number you supply. So there, absolute value of get system platform will give us a 1, a 2, a 3, and so forth. Next, let's declare a variable called prefix, and we're going to set it to be equal to what we get when we use the choose function on that platform result that we just got. Now, the choose function might be new to you as well, so let me demonstrate what it does. With the choose function, in the first argument, you supply a value or an expression that returns a value that's either 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or however many choices you would like this function to choose from among. And then you list off your results that you would want returned if the value, or the expression that returns a value, that results in a value, if the value is 0, then I want this result. If the value is 1, I want this result. If the value is 2, I want this result, and so on. It's a wonderful variation on using the case function, where the test is always the same and where the outcomes of the test are a range of whole numbers starting at 0. Okay? So that platform function, again, it was going to return a 1 if the user connected from a Mac, 2 if they connected from a Windows machine, and so on. Okay? Now, we know what the file path needs to look like on each side. And I'm going to break it down into kind of two portions: the prefix, and then the rest of and then the folders, and then the file name. Actually, three parts. Okay, so there's the prefix that's going to be specific to the platform: ImageMac:/, or ImageMac or image win : / and then the server name, right? So if the platform was 1, first of all, let's put in our test argument of a reference to that platform variable. If the platform was 0, well, the getSystemPlatform function can't return a 0, so we're just going to say if the platform was 0, then we don't want any result. If the platform was 1, though, we want, quote, ImageMac : and that's surrounded in quotes because it's literal text. Whereas if the platform was 2, -2, we know, but we converted it to the absolute value, then we would want, that means they're connecting from a Windows machine, and that means that we would want image win : / and then the name of my server, accelerate fm server.home, and a / end quote. Okay? All right, and we know it's not going to be anything outside of that, at least for this test. Only Mac and Windows platforms connecting in this case. And then let's let there be another variable, we'll call it folders, that's equal to, and then there's that whole string of folders, and this time I'll get smart about it and just copy and paste. Right from there, copy that much, put my quotes in and paste. There we go. And that part is the same for both platforms. All right, so then the calculation will simply concatenate all this business together. We'll say, take the prefix and concatenate it to the folder path, folders. Then, now the name of the image file starts with the name of the genus, dog, cat, bird, and so forth, and you can see those here, right? And so we'll go and get the genus title from the related genus record here. There it is. I'm not too worried about upper and lower case. This is not case sensitive. Otherwise, even though the file names have the genus title in all lowercase, we could wrap this much inside the lower function to convert it to lowercase. But since it won't make a bit of difference in the outcome, I'm not going to worry about it. And then we need an underscore character, because there was an underscore between the genus names and the animal names. And then we need the animal name itself, and of course that's found over here in the name field, like so. What did I forget? I forgot my ampersand. Sorry, there. And then we need the .jpeg, ampersand quote .jpg, end quote. Whew, okay, I think I got that right. If I've got any mistakes, I'll be notified right now. No, looks good. And so now, since that calculation doesn't refer to any of these other two fields that I created just temporarily to demonstrate this, I'll go ahead and delete those two fields. And we'll say OK. And now let's see if the remaining calculated container field is able to show the appropriate file. Hazel is. How about, yep, the bird called Faith is pointing to that file right there. That looks great. All right, cool. Now let me jump over and find, let's say, a cat called Fluffy. There we go. Right? And obviously it says, well, I can't find a file called cat Fluffy. And you're right, there's not one. But watch this. Let's say I've got this file right here. I know, it's coincidentally the same one I inserted earlier. But let's just change this name to satisfy the naming pattern, like so. Boom, right? Now we've got a file in that folder with the proper name, and as I jump out of that record and come back to it, did I spell it wrong? I did spell it wrong. I put an underscore. Oh my heavens. All right, let me fix that typo there, and then go back out of that record and back into it, and there, the calculated container is able to find it. Fantastic. What about on the Windows side where the paths are different? Well, let's see. Okay, over here, yep, it's working great. Yep, it's able to find it because we wrote the formula in such a way that it would accommodate Windows or Mac users or connections to the database and respecting the different paths that Windows versus Mac likes. Note that it will not work under WebDirect. In fact, file references are not supported in FileMaker WebDirect or in the FileMaker Data API or in custom web publishing. Let's look now at what is perhaps one of the most misunderstood features of container fields: external or remote storage of container data. In FileMaker 12, Claris added the feature of external or remote storage of container data for three primary purposes: to improve sharing of container data in a shared or hosted multi-user environment, to allow incremental backups, and to improve security of container files through encryption. It also reduces the size of the database compared to embedding files, and that lowers the risk of data corruption. External storage is not meant to allow us to work with container files outside of FileMaker. Like embedded files, they are under FileMaker's strict and exclusive management. No other process or application should touch those files. If you enable external storage for a container field, you must choose between open and secure storage. Secure files are encrypted and can only be read by FileMaker Pro. Open storage creates unencrypted files and readable folder paths. Now, where do the files get stored? Well, by default, container data will be stored in a subfolder of the folder where the database lives. I'll show you that shortly, but first, a word from Claris. The best practice for container fields at present, and we're in FileMaker 19.4, is to store container data externally. This practice helps reduce the size of the database file and the possibility of damaging the file. For example, if embedding a large file into a container field is interrupted, the database file can be damaged. If the container data is stored externally in this situation, the database won't be damaged, only the externally stored container data may be lost. Now I'll enable external storage for all the container fields in our database, some with open storage, others with secure, and then we'll look at the FileMaker server to see where they landed. Now first, let's take a glance at the FileMaker server so that you can see that the folder where container fields get stored, where container files get stored, is at present empty. Now I'm running a Mac server, and you can see that the FileMaker server software gets installed on the Macintosh hard drive, library folder, FileMaker server. In the data folders where the databases live, there's the databases folder, and here's the animal care database that we're actually using right now. It's this folder here, the RC Data FMS folder, where all that remote stored container data gets stored, all those files that you drop into container fields if you've set them to external storage. RC stands for remote container. And as I click into the folder named after our database, you can see that it's dead empty. There's nothing in there. All right, let me jump back into our FileMaker database. I'll hide that for a second. And go into Manage Database. And for our photo field, our container field, let me set the storage on the Storage tab here to store container data externally. The relative to the base path here is set, and you can change that if you needed to. Generally, it's best left set as it is, but you can change it in File Manage Containers. And then you can choose between secure storage and open storage. I'll use open storage. By default, it's going to use a folder path. It'll create subfolders under this Animal Clinic folder that's based on the name of the table and then the name of the field. So animal is the table, animal here. Photo is the field, photo is the next folder. And all the files that I drop into that container field will be stored in that folder, in that photo folder. All right, we'll say OK. And while I'm here, I'll tackle some of those other container fields as well. For example, in vendor, we had that catalog field, and I'll say store that data externally, but I'll use secure storage on it. So you can see the difference. We'll say OK. And then there was that signature field as well in the vet table, and I'll use open storage on it. Note that as I go through this, if you're storing your database in FileMaker Cloud, you must use secure storage. You cannot use open storage on a container field for databases that are hosted up in the Claris cloud. Notice the path here likewise gets set by default with the name of the table followed by the name of the field. As I click OK, a transfer dialog box will appear as it sees that there was some data in those fields already and it wants to then upload them to the server. I'll go ahead and say yes, please do that for all 3 fields that were having their storage option changed. I'll click transfer. It's going to take a minute and upload those files. Didn't take long. 17 files successfully transferred. Cool. Now let's look back at the server. Okay, and you'll see that there's now a new folder inside that Animal Care 25 folder inside the RC Data FMS, which is where your remote container data lives. Animal Clinic, and there's a folder called Animal with a field or with a folder called Photo, and there are the photos from that table. Likewise in the vet table, the signature field. And there's the signature of our vet. There it is, Eric Tolson. And then you've got this secure folder where the folder names are all just gibberish so that nobody can hack into those files and see what's going on. That's what happened when I set the secure storage option on that catalog field back in the vendor table. That's what it was. All right, so that's what your external storage is doing. It's uploading the files as they get dropped into the container fields to the server where they live safely. So, one last note. If a container field is optimized for images, like we talked about doing in layout mode, and you insert a file with the store only a reference option selected, then you'll be able to open that file into its native application by double-clicking the field. Just kind of a little particular context in which you can double-click on a container field file and have it open up into its native application. Again, that was if the container field is set for image optimization, not interactive optimization, and you've inserted a file using store only a reference. Okay, that's all I have for now on container fields in FileMaker. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.